Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so quick recap of what we want to do today. So I found this really cool API that's available and open. Doesn't require you to work out any of the security issues that you inevitably run into when you're working with an API. So this will be a good way for us to kind of understand how to use JavaScript to pull data from a source and manipulate it. But before we hop into that, let's just quickly talk about single script. So this should be a big workflow improvement. I've got this project that I created yesterday. Let me clear this chat out. And yeah, I broke that, so we'll get that fixed. But here we have a project. It's specifically this project. So when you create a new project, you can now add the Webflow URL. So any URL from your project will do because we clean it up with regex. It does need to be a Webflow URL. When we launched this, it said Webflow project name, and people would say test project, and that broke the page because it was not able to go out and grab the sitemap. So again, I can create this project. Let's just say this is one Jared at Webflow, and if I what did I call that? Let's try that again. Jared Webflow.io. Okay, so you'll notice this particular project didn't have a sitemap, so the single script will not work for that one. But if we come back here and go into this one, which is using this project here, then I do have all of the pages that I can write JavaScript to. And so here we have 4 different pages on that project. This one's going to be the global, so let's quickly write a console log to it. And now when I come here and I inspect, here I have the global that's running. If I go to this index page, I have index running. So you'll notice right here, I'm console logging the index. On this page here, the tutorial, I'm logging the tutorial, but not the index. I am logging the global on every single page. And here on the cards page, I'm logging the cards, but not the index or tutorial. So if I want to add another page, I can come in here. Let's do form. And now I have the form JavaScript. So if I come here to form, you'll notice I have this added, and I don't have to go back into Webflow and recreate or add that snippet. I can just do it the one time.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so it should really improve workflow. Of course, you can publish that and have that available on your production domain as well. Same kind of thing. We also are handling the external scripts, so you can add an external script that's available on a specific page, but not the others, and so that's all working.
So if you're managing multiple sites, does it make sense to make one project for each site?
Yeah.
And then the pages within that. Okay, that's cool.
You could have just like a garbage project where you're just creating scripts, adding those scripts. But generally speaking, the design is to have the project that's related to a Webflow project. Is it Darshil? Can you mute maybe? I think we're getting a lot of background noise. Anyway, Jack, can you from your side. There we go. Thank you, Darsha. Cool. So that's the latest updates, a number of kind of smaller improvements, bug fixes. Let us know. We have plenty going on at Edgar Allen, but we'll be making we'll be prioritizing kind of user feedback as we continue development. Cool. So let's start talking about APIs and writing JavaScript to work with those APIs. So the first thing we want to do is review documentation. So let's hop over here. This is the fake store API, which is there's several of these, but I can never find them. But I ran across this particular API this week and thought it'd be a great tool to use. So if we hop into the docs, this is going to give us all of the information we need. So I can actually just kind of copy and paste this into my project and it should work. But we're going to use prompts from Slater to do all of this. So has anybody worked with an API before? It is a superpower, so it's pretty cool. Does anybody know what an API stands for? Or what is an API exactly?
It's application programming interface.
So the best way I've heard it described is you have two separate systems, and if you're talking to that separate system, you need to know how they speak. And so what an API does is it defines how you should speak to it. And so it's kind of giving a handshake, and yeah, you just need to know, okay, I'm calling this particular resource. What is that resource name? And what are the different parameters that I can send into that resource to get back what I want? And so that's where your documentation is critical. So you need to know kind of, first off, what is the endpoint that you're hitting? That endpoint is what's going to be returning the data. And then you have to understand what parameters you need to send up to it. So in this particular case, we're just doing a simple get fetch. And so it's really basic and we don't have to send a lot of parameters with it. With a full service API, a lot of times you're going to have to be sending headers and security headers, probably like a bearer token or some other API key in order to say, okay, I am a person who has access to this data. A lot of times the API provider wants to know who's accessing the data, and they're probably charging you for that data. And so having something like an API key allows them to understand who is interacting with that API. So unfortunately, we're going to kind of skip through a lot of that. And unfortunately, also, a lot of times you're not able to work with an API from the client or from the browser. You have to work with a server to send that data down to the browser. But APIs are super useful. It's kind of critical to understand how to work with them. Even for Webflow projects, it's fairly common to write different APIs, write two different APIs. Job boards is one that came up this week. I think it was called Lever. So there are a number of use cases where understanding how to get data from an API is important. So let's get started. And for this first one, let's just get all products. And so I'm going to hop back into here. Before we do this, are there any questions about kind of high-level API questions? If not, let's get started. Okay, so it's pretty cool because somehow OpenAI, ChatGPT, Slater knows about this fake stores API. So I can just say, I would like to get all products from the fake store API, please loop through each product and log the product to the console. So let's see what we can do there. So what this is going to do is it's going to essentially write this. And so this fetch is the most basic form of API of a asynchronous request. So Mozilla is kind of the authority, so you should be looking at this. But honestly, as a beginner JavaScript developer, will probably go over your head largely. So I always love to go to the W3 schools. It's much more simple to understand. And this fetch pattern here is very simple, but there's a number of alterations you can make to it, which makes it kind of complicated as you start doing more complicated things with it. Let's go back and just see kind of the simple bit that we got from ChatGPT or from Slater AI. So I'm going to drop this. I actually don't want to do it on this page. I want to do it on, let's do it in the globals. So I should have, how did I do that? I'm just going to copy this over. Let's try running that one more time. But we can come back here. Let's just copy this. And now when we come to, I want to work on this product page. Cool. So I made this page off of our Webflow project that we were working on last week. And all I have on here is a few divs with IDs connected to them. So we've got a success ID, a product ID, and a products ID. And you'll see over here we have a number of products logged to the console. And so this is kind of cool because we've already gotten data from the fake stores API, and now we can do something with it. So rather than log it to the console, let's do something useful. Let's say now that we have the product data, can you print the product data to the products div? And you'll notice I'm very conversational with it. It tends to work well. I'm using specific language, or like specific, in this case, selectors. And the more specific you can be with it, the better it is at giving a response. So for example, the fact that I said I'm using the fake store API allowed it to actually get me the URL. And now I'm using this products div. I actually don't like this response, but it will work. So we'll just, it is fairly common to get like additional HTML or something like that. This is where you have to kind of understand what you're looking at and be able to make updates. So this script tag is already on the page, so we don't need that in our JavaScript. And we can't even have it in our JavaScript. It's a problem if we do. So if I just delete the HTML from that, I could also query it and say, thanks, but just provide the JavaScript. And one thing we're working on is kind of like a notebook type feature where you won't even have to interact with like an editor. Like you could just say, okay, this looks good. I'm going to save this to my file. That's truly like no code JavaScript, which is kind of cool. Let's look and see how this did. So we're getting this product's ID, and we're creating a variable out of that. We're then doing the fetch request to this product's endpoint. Earlier today, like I don't know exactly what response JSON does, So I can ask to have that explained to me. And let's wait for that to come back. So we've got these two then statements, then callbacks. So what's happening is we're going out to products. Once it goes out there and gets it back, so it's asynchronous. So it's not like we can just say, okay, do this next thing, because that data from the endpoint may not be there. So then waits for that, and then once it's there, it responds with this response variable. And then we parse through that JSON, and you'll see here, this JSON is a method that returns the promise that resolves the JSON representation of the response body. So essentially, it's taking what it's getting from this endpoint, and it's manipulating that to be JSON that can be used by JavaScript. And once that's done, it then calls this function, and we now have this response of products that we can do something with. And this might be a little bit confusing to you, because what you're probably more familiar with is something like function do something, and we could have a parameter here that would be product, or products. Let's say this is kind of the old school way of writing a function. There's now this cool ES6 way of writing a function, which is essentially what this is. So this arrow function is anonymous, but it is something like, I'm not even good at writing these, but do something, something like this. And these are roughly the same, but there are a few differences in how it's scoped, and I don't even understand all of those differences. Probably my best recommendation is to just stick with what you're familiar with. And that said, as you start chatting with Slater AI, it's going to recommend these arrow functions. Documentation may oftentimes have arrow functions. If you're working in a project somebody else has written, it may be using arrow functions. So it's important to understand these different types of functions. And so again, you could do ES6 functions, and this W3 schools will kind of help you understand those. So like here's the arrow function. So ES5, this is the old way of doing it. ES6, this is the other way of doing it. Largely, it's more concise, potentially easier to read, less words, but there may be a few other intricacies that could trip you up potentially, but probably don't. Okay, so now we have this. Let's look at what that response is. Cool. So here we have all of those products printed out on the page. And we have now kind of worked with an API. So I don't know if everybody else is working in real time, but this is something you guys could be doing right now. If you've got a Slater instance open and just any Webflow project with, like, we could do this to, like right now we're doing it to products, but you could use any old page. Let's just say we're using the body. And now when we do this, we're appending to that body and getting kind of the same experience pretty much.
Yeah, Jared, you were the one that kind of showed me and taught me how to use APIs forever ago. And there's so many cool free ones out there. Like this one, I love this one. I love just having access to fake data and just things you can pull in and manipulate. But US Geological Survey has amazing like water quality data on rivers. You can get weather data. You can get data on highway traffic, things like that. And the thing is, like, Slater innately via this chat function has familiarity with these things and can return stuff you can just, start with. And once you got the data, you can do anything with it. Like you could map, colors to water temperature or connect Lottie's to it, or Jeff, like connect Reeve state machines to the data that's coming back via the API. And it really, like, you can get really weird with it and have a lot of fun with it, like really easily without having to pay for access to this stuff. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. Like there's a bunch of concepts within development and technology that give you superpowers, and APIs are really one of those superpowers.
Totally.
Cool. So we've got this kind of first implementation of getting all products. Let's move on to another one. So this time, instead of getting all of them, let's just get a single product. And again, this one's going to be fairly straightforward because we're doing a GET request. So there's a bunch of, I'm bad with my lingo. I want to say methods, but you can get, you can post, you can put, and you can delete. I think there might be one more, but those are the big ones. Get is just obviously getting something. Post is sending data up. Put is updating data, and delete, of course, is deleting data. So we'll do one more with that GET request, and so we'll get a single item. So I'm just going to blow this away. You can always come back to this in the chat archive. But now I want to say get this fake store API. I'd like to get a single product from fake store API. The way I'm going to do this is I'm actually going to pass a parameter in, and like a URL parameter, to allow us to have get a dynamic product. So we're going to say get the ID. Let's see, get the URL parameter ID and fetch that product. And then print that product to the, product div. Again, like I am not great at prompting. I do my best. I think you want to use as descriptive words as possible. Get the language roughly readable, and the AI is extremely good at kind of understanding what you're asking for, generally speaking.
One thing I've been doing on the prompting front that just like conceptually helped me is thinking about it as you're giving a creative brief to the AI, or you're given a requirements document to the AI. And you can do that sequentially, or you can do that all at once. But there's something kind of satisfying about the dance in the dialogue between the thing where it returns something and then you ask for something else. And so just putting that out there.
Okay, so this first line, this is getting the parameter from the URL. So in this case, it's the ID. And then we're going to fake store API. We're getting the products and then this specific product, whatever the ID is. Then we run through the to then statements, and we get the product div. So we're going to be doing that. And then we are generating a product, or we're adding the HTML to that product div. And yeah, this is something called a template literal. It's extremely useful. Back in the day, you used to have to write, like you'd say, var product div equals div, and you do product div plus equals something, and then product div plus equals closing div. And so anytime you wanted to write like some HTML in your JavaScript, it was just really tedious, really ugly. And now you can just do this template literal, write all of your HTML, and then use this syntax here to add the data to your template. Okay, so if we go here now, you'll notice we get nothing back and we actually get the error. And just so you know, there's this catch statement here, and that's returning this error that we're logging to the console. So if I do this, just so we can see, unexpected end of JSON input. So I don't really know what that means exactly, but essentially we're going to this URL and there's no product ID, and so that's the response we're getting. We could change this. We could say, you have not provided an ID. Now when we come back here, here's the error. You've not provided an ID. Writing good error messages is a really good thing to do. It's something I'm not good at doing. But
Oh, me neither.
yeah, it's kind of one of those, you need a lot of time to be able to write all your errors. So let's go back here, and now we can just say equals ID equals 1. And so this is now the parameter that's being passed. And here we're getting our first product. And I can then go here and get the second one. And so this is cool because you could, like we initially had, so we could do something like this. We could say if product ID, do this, and else, let's go back to our chat archive, and let's copy maybe this first one. Let's see if that's right. Okay, so we get our second one there. If we exit this, nope. Let's see, so this product ID, let's console this log. Make sure so let's see what the product ID returns if there's no product ID, because I don't exactly know, but we did not get it, the if statement that so this product ID is null. So I'm surprised.
Is it missing the parameter?
I just copied exactly what we had before. So I just need to go down
gotcha.
And copy this. Oh, shoot. Oh, my copy's not working. No. That's a bug I'll have to fix. But anyway, we can just make a quick update here. And let's make this go to products. I think that should work. Nope. It's because we're not looping through it. So anyway, we'll just say console log show all products, and we can get that code that we had earlier and put it in there. So now show all products and ID equals 3, get that single product. Cool. Any questions up to this point? Okay, so let's actually post data to this API. And this one's interesting because it is a fake API and anybody can post to it. So I'm not exactly sure how they're handling this, but I'm sure we can use Slater to make this work. So let's start over and let's say I would like to post a product to fake store API, use the following data. I'm going to do going to go to the documentation and just see what they're doing here, or what I can send into it. So if I come back here, I'm just going to push. Let's just take this and make updates to it. So title, let's say Slater, key, price is good, description's good. I'm going to do something different here, and let's say clothing. For the image, please use a placeholder image. Okay, let's see how we do with that. As we wait for that to come, so there's a few things going on. So we've got an endpoint that we're connected to. We now have some parameters we're sending in there. So we're saying this method is post, and then we're sending in a body of this object. And you'll notice we're using JSON stringify to make this, to alter this object into a way that the API can receive it. And then we've got these two then statements. So when we push something up, the server should respond with JSON, and we can log that JSON to the console. Okay, so you'll notice this is pretty close to what was here. There's a few differences. So we declare this object as product data, and we then have this body tag that, or body key that we are stringifying here. So that's kind of how JavaScript always works. You can change anything into a variable and then just use that variable. We're using this content type application JSON. This is probably not required. I assume this is the default content type header, but this makes it explicit. We could, in theory, be sending up like XML or something like that, but when you're working with JavaScript, it's almost always JSON. And this method posts like we saw. So let's see how we do here. So let's strip that out. Cool. So it was successful. So you'll notice it responds with that object. And here's the placeholder URL that we put up there. So it's nice to have it in the console, but let's say, perfect. Can you add the response to the product div? And this is like a really common pattern. Like you'll send data up to the database, to the server that gets saved in the database, and then you'll add that same information to the page. And in theory, we could just add this directly to the page, but you want to make sure that it actually got saved before you do that. And so that's why it's good to do it at the end of this this API request. Okay, so drop that on. Let's see how we do. Cool.
It's so cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool that it just like picked some placeholder image and was able to handle it. Of course, like if we had more time, what we would want to do is we'd want to create a form, and we want to use that form to populate this data. So in theory, any user could come in here, say, okay, what's the title, what's the price, what's the description, type it in there, click submit. That gets pushed up to the server, saved, and then response provides the response that gets added to the page.
Jeff, does this get your gears going on ways you might be able to incorporate with, it makes me think of State Machine, but I mean, it seems like there's a ton of ways you could do that, like connect the data that's coming back through to an animation?
Yeah, definitely. I was going to ask too if there's a way, like if you have your own data source in something like Airtable, if you can pull an API from that, because if you can bring in a number, you can use that to drive arrive animation or anything that you can use to trigger a Boolean operation. I think there's all kinds of really cool stuff you could do based on an external data source, which would be super cool.
Yeah, I don't know. My brain kind of breaks when I think about all the different stuff you can do with the stuff that comes back, because it's like it's almost like sky's the limit. Once you've got the data, how that expresses itself can be motion. You could trigger it to play videos via, Vimeo, YouTube API. Like you can stack APIs. It does feel like a cheat code too, because it's like I while we were doing this and I was working alongside Jared, what you were doing, I was actually seeing what it would return for the Chattahoochee River through the USGS API, and I've got current data for temperature, clarity, gauge height, all that. And so then it's like we had a project we worked on a while back called River Time. That was one of the things we were thinking about, was like, how are we going to get data and then manipulate it? And we weren't able to take it as far as we wanted to, but it's like, if you connect temperature to something like a YouTube query based on, if it's between 70 and 80 degrees, I want you to bring me a video of, beautiful beach with roughly that weather. If it's a snowstorm outside, bring me that back and show that. Like it turns into this, you've got a dialogue, not just with the bot and with OpenAI, but you've got a dialogue between APIs talking to each other and asking each other for different stuff. And
yeah. So I used this for writing into the Twitter API over the weekend, and this is like where you'll have some limitations. Like I just wanted to see like what it would say for how we could write to Airtable. So it got us all of this this initial fetch request. Kind of boilerplate, and the problem you'll have is like you'll see like it's an API key and a base ID, and you need to have like this bearer token. And if I come over here, like there is a JavaScript implementation, but you have to use Node.js to do that. And again, it's a lot to do with security, and so I don't know that you'll be able to work with the Airtable API from Slater and Webflow. But there are a ton of APIs out there that will enable you to do kind of cool stuff.
I will say, and because I've tried this, you can have GPT/Slater Chat run you through the steps to set up a Heroku instance for a Node.js server. It's like literally, it's like do this first, then do this, then do this. And once you've got that set up, you're essentially creating your own API. So like then you can connect the Webflow API, or that's like Jared's saying, you don't want to expose your key for like your specific thing to the world, like for all kinds of reasons. But you can use these tools. You can work in Slater to get that set up and then take that code over, and it's really amazing how well it can step you through those processes.
I don't know that we need to delete a product, but that is also something we could do. And you're just sending that method delete, and you're making sure that you're targeting the correct product ID. So that kind of gets us through the most of it. Again, like there's also the update of a product that we could do as well. But I do want to quickly kind of run through some of the key concepts that we talked about today. So there is the idea of APIs. What you'll want to do whenever you're thinking about using an API is go to the documentation, make sure that it's something you can do with your current capabilities and access to technologies. So a lot of times if you're saving data, if you're pulling data that is sensitive, you'll need to work with a server. And the biggest reason is because anytime you're working with JavaScript, you're working from the client or the browser, and that essentially says like all that is you can't really make that private. And so there are some APIs that will allow you to work from the client, and you just have to whitelist the domain. And there's some different security tactics that they use for just straight up JavaScript APIs. But yeah, go to the API docs. Just start getting familiar with them. APIs, the most difficult thing is just getting that first one to work. It's kind of like having that first conversation with a foreign person. Once you have that first conversation working, then it's fairly easy to make the updates and understand the parameters that you can pass and the intricacies for that particular API. Cool. So fetch, this is like the cool new way of doing asynchronous calls. So back in the day, it was Ajax, and have you ever written like a straight up JavaScript Ajax request?
I mean, not on my own. I've done it with Slater.
This was like the crazy way you had to do it in the past. Like you open up, you create this request, and then you had these methods that you could call on that. And you'll notice like it was multi-step, and you had to understand like the intricacies for each step. So it was for me at the time, like it wasn't something I could do. But what I could do is use jQuery, and this made it much simpler. So again, the jQuery docs are not the simplest. So here you'll see like jQuery, whatever the method is, and then the parameters that you can send in. Again, I just love how easy W3 schools are. So if you're learning, this is the first place you should look. There are all of these different Ajax methods that you could run. So that's where kind of that last Ajax pure JavaScript implementation gets complicated. This can be a little bit complicated, but if you kind of understand like what you're doing, then it gets fairly simple. Like this gets really simple. You're just getting that URL, and then you're running a function on that. So today we didn't talk about jQuery at all, but jQuery still makes writing Ajax very simple. So jQuery is bundled in your Webflow project all the time. So leveraging jQuery, I think, is a really good thing to do as a beginner developer.
I've found myself using it more lately, just because of how easy it is to work with it with Slater. Yeah. Like the one thing I have noticed, and you probably have already mentioned this, but using the Webflow push function from the library when using jQuery stuff. Like I've got a video I did this morning on creating a CMS slider using Slater and Slick Slider, and you basically have to do the Webflow push function to get the timing right for when the scripts load. But I mean, it's right there. You just drag it straight out, and then it's good to go.
Exactly. So. Objects. Does anybody remember what the object was? Like, do you know what an object is? So objects are extremely common within JavaScript, and it's essentially this right here, where it's opening, closing, and then you have a key and a value, and you can add as many keys and values as you want. The key is a string. The value can be anything. So in this case, it's a template literal to turn into a string. It can be Boolean. It can be a function. So it provides a lot of it can be customized to be anything essentially, but it kind of bundles the data together. And so it's anytime you're working with JSON, it's coming back as like a giant object. and there's different ways to interact with that object. In today, I think we've only written objects, so this is like a really good example here. But you can take this variable and update it. In this case, you can't because it's a constant. But if this was a let, then you could say something like let dot, or sorry, product data dot title equals new title, and that would update this. And so if you're not familiar with objects, this is a very key concept within JavaScript. So go to W3 schools and brush up on it.
One thing that can I share my screen real quick just to show one thing? Okay, cool. So I just have been, again, just practicing writing some of these queries for USGS. I love water. So it's like, give me info about this water. But I've been kind of taking what it's given me and spitting it back and forth into the chat bot to kind of refine the data. And the last thing I was doing was just actually having it, you can actually instruct it as it brings data back across to take the returned keys and wrap those in a separate object. And so like you can nest objects and things like that. What it comes back as initially is kind of hard to read. And so what I said was, hey, as you generate this stuff, can you give me friendlier titles for some of this stuff? And you may not be able to see it very well, but so it'll give me like this site, and then the gauge height, the unit, the time it was queried, and the value. So that's 5.98 feet. But like instead of having to go through the entire object and like drill down into the key pairs, you can instruct Slater to say, I want you to grab me all of the significant stuff and make that in a way that is easier for me to understand. Once you got that, you can manipulate it like crazy. And this query took about, probably even with the refinements, like 5 minutes to write.
Yeah,
so,
it's incredible.
It's wild, right?
So
that's all I got though.
Whit and I have spent the last 10 years of our lives like working with code, and now we can do stuff 5 minutes that took us that long to figure out.
Honestly, it's making it fun again.
Yeah,
like
it is. Just like a week ago, I just had like a super productive day because I was able to just like ask Slater to do like a handful of things for me that would, like I knew how to solve them. Like I would have been able to solve them. It just would have taken me a bunch of like troubleshooting, and it was just like, hey, bot, do this for me, and it got me 90% of the way there. And it was just a few tweaks that made the code do what it needed to do.
That's wild.
Cool. So we're getting close to time, and I'm about out of everything I wanted to talk to you about. I think the biggest thing I would love to hear from everybody and anyone who listens to this later on is like, what are the APIs that are useful? Like Whit's got that really weird kind of water data API that he's found. There's crazy APIs out there. And it'd be cool.
I love a free API, man.
Interesting ones that we come across. Cool.
Well, it's good to see you guys.
Yep. We'll see ya.